morning. My name is Cecilia Tortajada, and I am professor in practice at the School of Social and Environmental Sustainability, University of Glasgow. Today's webinar on critical water infrastructure and climate change impacts is part of our Water and Sustainable Development webinar series. In this occasion, the webinar is co-organized by the International Water Resources Association, a renowned professional association on water. Our distinguished panel members are Joost Burman from Royal Haskoning DHB and National University of Singapore, Deborah Tan, China Water Risk in Hong Kong, Theodore Popa, Brasov Water Company in Romania, and J. Carl Gunter, Circle of Blue in United States. You can find their brief biodata on the webpage of this event and more information on the International Water Resources Association on their own webpage. Each one of our panel members will make introductory remarks, which will be followed by questions and answers. Feel free to send us questions on topics on which you are interested. So let's start our discussions today. Our first panel member is Joost Burman. Joost, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining us today.
Okay, Cecilia, thank you very much also for inviting me. I think this will be a very interesting discussion. It's very actual, of course, also with all the natural disasters that are happening lately and actually always. I'm based in Singapore, which is a tropical city-state on an island, and generally the tropical climate is very stable. Singapore does not experience any climate extremes as seen in other countries. The extremes are generally very mild. They can cause some damage. I mean, we had about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we had a main shopping street that was flooded. Last year, actually last month, we had some unusually strong winds that accompanied thunderstorms that toppled some trees. But it's minor to what we see at the moment for instance, in Spain and other places. But Singapore is not unique or is not immune to climate change. The National Center for Climate Change has prepared a plan that was issued last year, in which they forecasted that the number of hot days with temperatures above 35 degrees is expected to double. That can, for instance, especially affect people working outdoors. Some construction companies have already started implementing measures such as providing more water in shaded rest areas. The airport here in Singapore installed refresh pods for its platform workers where they can cool or dry themselves. But looking, of course, this is more about water supply infrastructure. Singapore's third climate study also forecast that dry spells are expected to become more regular. And in a tropical country with ample rainfall, this means that a dry spell means that there is 15 consecutive days with less than 1 millimeter of rain. And so far, Singapore's water supply system has been able to cope very well with extreme weather events. In 2014, there was a record dry spell of 62 days with hardly any rain. That caused some mild stress on the water supply system. The demand of water actually increased, but yeah, it was able to cope well. And in the two subsequent years, a reservoir that is very important for Singapore's water supply system reached an historic low, which also caused some mild stress in terms of running desalination plants at full capacity, and the minister saying that people should use less water. But that was basically all. That was unlike the situation in the Malaysian state of Johor, which is just north of Singapore, where water rationing had to be implemented at the time because there was not sufficient water. The reason, I think, for the main reason for the difference between Malaysia and Singapore is that Singapore has developed a very robust water supply system over the years. And key to that is diversification. Singapore has a diversified set of resources, which is the so-called four TAPs. consisting of desalination, water recycling, local catchment water, and water imported from Malaysia. The water recycling is also up to a level that it can be used as drinking water. It can be put back into the drinking water supply system. And I think diversification is a key to deal with extreme events, both droughts, floods, and many things can be diversified. I mean, you can diversify your supply sources, you can diversify your production locations, you can put in network redundancy for that you have a diversified network, different measures to increase supply or reduce demand. Of course, diversification comes at a cost. It may be much more efficient, for instance, to concentrate your water treatment plant, to concentrate all your water production in one location, have one large water treatment plant, because it might be more efficient than have a number of smaller ones that are at different locations. But if the single plant would get affected by a flood, the whole supply network would be down. So there is this trade-off that always need to be made. I want to make one short second point, and that is that in addition to diversification, of course, planning for climate disasters is very important. A few years ago, I did a study where we looked at 10 large cities globally and how they dealt with droughts in their water supply system. And we found that most cities only used a few measures rather than diversify. And also that most measures were actually reactive. So after the drought started, they realized, okay, we have to do something. Though several cities also had some strategic measures in place, which are planned and implemented in advance. And that is important, to have something in place that you know what to do when the disaster strikes. And unfortunately, disasters usually serve as a catalyst for that type of measures. First, something needs to happen before people are acting. And it is really like I think one of our tasks as scientists and people working in the section, practitioners, to educate and advocate for planning before a disaster happens, rather than being reactive after it happens. So Cecilia, that is my introductory words. I hope the other speakers can continue on this.
Thank you very much, Jus. You mentioned several very important aspects, like the preparedness rather than reacting, strategic measures, and diversification. You mentioned diversification in terms of water supply. How would it look? This is a question for after everybody makes their introductory remarks. How, in the future, where we have more sudden extreme events, how would it look? How would this planning look? Do you have to, would cities or countries have to always allocate budget for an event that may or may not happen? And to what point does one is able to incorporate trade-offs? Because they are unforeseen. These are situations that are just happening. So thank you again. We'll come back to you. And now we will go with our second panel member, who is Deborah Tan. And Deborah, please, the floor is yours.
Right. Totally agree with Joost. So I think I'm just going to go off-piste a little bit, still talking about critical water infrastructure and climate change impacts. So at CWR, we primarily unpack complex water and climate risks for business and finance community. And, we can clearly sort of see that these huge events and so forth, and also the Spain floods and et cetera, besides a massive disruption to lives and homes and so forth, is going to have an impact on the economy. And recovery is also going to take time and cost money. And the more times we're hit, the harder it is to recover until it becomes chronic. And we sort of see that there is rising chronic water risk going forward. Beyond all the freshwater issues, there are also flooding from coastal threats such as sea level rise and storm surges, all of which are also intensifying and accelerating. So we kind of see, I put 5 things on the table, and I'm happy to discuss this later on. One is the infrastructure risks presented to finance. These risks are going to be massive. Some of this is going to be existential if we don't adapt critical infrastructure. So I'll give you an example. In Hong Kong, in the worst case scenario of rising seas, on the cannot be ruled out scenarios, which is more likely than not to happen because of fast ice melt now, 80% of water supply pumps will be underwater. 50% of sewage treatment plants will also be underwater. So this is from sea level rise. It's also going to impact 55% of cold storage, 73% of data centers, and probably all of power generation because it requires water to generate, and 100% of oil bunkering. So this is all the critical infrastructure needed to run a city, and that's going to sort of clearly impact finance. And so financial banks, so when I'm saying finance, I don't just mean insurers, because that's a little bit more obvious. I also mean banks, because their loan books too, their mortgage loan books will be under stress, and also obviously all their project financing loans to the infrastructure I just talked about. Real estate sector is also going to be impacted, and I want to talk a little bit about water's impact on energy security and energy infrastructure. A lot of power plants are also coastal. They will be also taken out. Clean energy transition could also be stymied because of flooding or coastal threats. So riverine as well as from the oceans. Obviously, there's also freshwater intake problems when it comes to coastal threats. And the other thing is a lot of power plants in Asia, where we're focused, is actually located on river basins because they require water to generate. So across Asia, we looked at about 1.9 terawatts of power, and 800, so almost half of that is actually sitting in 10 river basins, and 300 or so gigawatts of that. So that will be the equivalent of the power of Germany, UK, and France is sitting on highly to extremely high water stress areas and drawing water from the rivers. Almost all of that power will require water to generate. So if we don't manage water, we're going to also have other risks ahead. The last thing I want to put there is also obviously trade. A lot of our ports are also very low lying. A lot of oil bunkering. We looked at 2/3 of global oil is actually shipped by sea. A lot of these ports are also going to be underwater, and I can expand on that later. Thing going forward is that we'll need, everyone's banking on climate tech and AI to sort of make a difference. I think it can help us be more efficient and also to fast track solutions in decarbonization. However, that also requires a massive amount of water and power to run. So we're going to sort of run into a mass nexus of competing demands for water going forward, and all of which, and all the critical infrastructure that we rely on, not just water, will be impacted by some form of water risks as well. So I think we need to think about it holistically, and water infrastructure is obviously the underlying or key in solving all these other problems as well. And obviously in Asia, we also need to still develop, and that would increase the demand and pressures for water going forward. And all of that would need to sort of be considered together. I will stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. What you have presented is what seems to be unmanageable situation, which is what is supported by your studies. Let me invite the people who are listening to us to read your reports. The one on Hong Kong is very striking, because it's very well fundamented, and it presents the complexity not only of the situation, but what do we do next? And this is what my question is about for when we come back to you.
Okay.
Finances are needed now. Finances will be needed in the future. in your experience and with all the work you have done in practice, what are these instruments that will help us more? Because at the end, there will be these trade-offs that both you and Yus mentioned. So where do we invest first so that there can be some cascading effects? Because with water infrastructure, it fails, there are cascading effects in another sectors, as it happens in energy. But if we see it from the possibility side, where is it that we can invest first and second and third that can render the best possible situations? So, Deborah, thank you very much again. Now we go with our third panel member, and it's my pleasure to introduce Theodore Popa. Thank you very much for being with us today. And we bring a different perspective today, which is a perspective of a water utility who is at the forefront of the problems and at the forefront of the solution, which makes it very relevant. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. The climate change is referring to flood and drought, more frequent, less predictable, and more severe than before. Valencia is the most recent example, where among 200 plus fatalities are also some Romanians. Nobody is spared from these tragic events. Coming to the utilities, in 2020, more than 200 communities in Romania were temporarily cut off from the water supply. Despite this fact, according to a study conducted the next year by the World Bank, among major water utilities, most of them did not perceive the drought as a major issue and cannot estimate very accurate the impact of the associated cost or effects. This was something that was surprised at the time. Romania being one of the most affected country, the 2022 drought was considered the most severe drought since climate data have been recorded in Romania. The total rainfalls only 20 millimeters in 10 months, combined with temperature over 36 degrees more than 35 days, made the eastern half of Romania the most affected region. We found out that the main impacts were on reduction on flow rates in most rivers, large or small, water supply disrupted in more than 220 localities, 30% in reduction of energy, affecting also the nuclear power plant, 25-30% reduction in agricultural production compared with the previous year. Forest fires increased sevenfold in 22, and low level of the Danube River restricted transport and navigation, blocking hundreds of ships. So the World Bank wanted also to enter into the utilities area and ask about the effect that was perceived by the water utilities, and the key findings were that the utilities were not fully aware of the impact, even though they can show that some impacts on operational level were there, like intermittent or low pressure water supply, which imply in some cases to put the mobile water tanks in these localities and trying to switch to alternate sources if they were available. The utilities felt the financial impact in some revenues loss due to above limited water supply or the water bill reduction. In Romania, there is a law: if you are not complying with the contractual provisions, you should give a discount of 30%. It was experiencing some cases lowered water bill collection because the clients is unsatisfaction of the level of the service. Increasing cost, of course, the production cost was increased, being forced to switch to underground source. The electricity, its consumption, it's higher. At the time the perfect storm was there, electricity price increased 8 times. Usage in watering in rural areas increased the losses, because in rural area you have the cost higher than the revenue, but now you have the higher demand in the rural areas. But one of the biggest cost was the reputational one. The customers and the local authorities were completely unsatisfied about that. Coming back to the flood, Romania is the fourth among EU countries in terms of flood risk. A common misunderstanding is that a flood with a return period of 100 years is likely to occur once within a 100-year time span. Actually, there is about 63 chances for one or more floods to occur in any period of 100 years, which we experienced already. Since 2000, floods have claimed 240 lives in Romania. The 2005 and 2006 floods alone affected 1.5 million people, destroying an important part of the country's flood risk management infrastructure, and causes damages over 2 billion euro. A recent flood risk assessment estimates that climate change will exacerbate this risk. But let's have a look at the solutions. Too often we are looking to the gray solutions and not to the nature-based one, the green ones, the ones inspired by nature, which can give more benefits, environmental, social, or economical one, helping to build resilience. EU directive encourage this kind of solutions. Romania has an initiative for Lower Danube Green Corridor, which is the largest wetland protection and restoration program in Europe, initiated in 2000 with other countries. But on the flood risk management plan, less than 4% are new green intervention. This nature-based solution seems not to be used in Romania because of awareness, skepticism, and local authorities continues to be reluctant to adopt such. Knowledge base and the lack of technical expertise. It's a lack of specific guidance on identifying and apprising nature-based solutions, and these are not yet integrated in the university programs. In this respect, I salute today's webinar, which can be a useful tool for students and city planners. And the last problem I want to tackle today, it's about the stormwater. I have to mention that in Romania, the water utilities are doing the whole water cycle, from potable water treatment and supply to sewage and wastewater treatment, including the rainwater management in the city. More often, people say that any strong rain brings a chaos into the city, blaming the sewage system not being able to take over the stormwater. The press and local authorities, along with the population, are joining the choir. It is the right question? I would rather say no, because there is no proper infrastructure to facing and to tackle this kind of problem. A classic solution cannot manage today's urban floods. Another issue is nobody wants to pay for the rainwater. And of course, the unsuitable institutional arrangement, as it seems that is nobody's problem but the water utility, which is not the answer to this kind of question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation that shows, again, a very complex situation, a very complex real situation in a place that is vulnerable from many points of view. If you could please give some thought at this question when we come back to you. We see that there are every time more these extreme events, be the droughts or floods, flash floods, and they are unexpected. Many of them are unexpected. And if we see the role of a water utility, that is very important because the people need to be supplied with clean water, government offices, hospitals, schools. Not how easy, but how to plan short-term, mid-term, long-term on this supply of clean water with all the changes that are happening because of the impacts of climate change. So we will come back to you with this question. So thank you again. And now we will go with our last speaker, last but not least, Carl Gunter. Carl, thank you very much for joining us. And could you enlighten all of us who are listening how the role of the media is very important. The role of the media in terms of awareness, of information, of knowledge dissemination, and information that doesn't create panic, because we all hear news all the time that many times are being transmitted live. They have created a sense of urgency. Things are wrong. Things cannot be fixed, because by the time something is being fixed, something has happened somewhere. So the media jumps or moves to another location, giving this big vacuum of information and that awareness, or perhaps that purpose is lost, the awareness, information, the knowledge dissemination, because of how fast the situations are moving. But I let you make your introductory remarks, and thank you again for joining us today.
Cecilia, it's so great to be here and to be with friends and great colleagues, really on the front lines. And yeah, so I'm Carl Ganter, and I'm managing director at Circle of Blue. And our real mission here is exactly that: is what is this grand story? And I'll share a couple of images here. I'm also a photojournalist, and we use great journalism and frontline storytelling to really, in a sense, make these stories come alive. And we're really shifting our media messaging here is truly, how do we listen to today and the past to truly design water's future? Because we've heard from previous speakers, and we see every day that we're facing truly grand challenges. And I just want to underscore, this really is a profound moment. This is a moment that we have to get right, and decisions are being made. Either they're being made or they're not being made, but they're being made by default, that truly are defining our water's future. A couple of things just to level set here too is that recently the Global Commission on the Economics of Water came out with its report that basically water underscores all of the Sustainable Development Goals. They will not be successful. We will not be successful unless we get water right, unless we actually change course. Now, Deborah and others talked about, in a sense, the lack of action, or the cost of inaction. And we're starting to see major banks starting to quantify this because water continues to be sublimated in many of the conversations, particularly around the SDGs. Even at the UN, the COP Biodiversity Summit, water, at least as of a couple of days ago, was even barely mentioned in the ministerial documents. And yet it is the one blue thread connecting everything. And so what is this story? And then how do we slow down these risks? Risks to most people, to the public, are really kind of out there, and it's like buying insurance. But those risks are turning to realities, as we've seen from just globally. And they also are intersecting, and this may be a little hard to see on the screen, but water underscores all of the other major challenges. So when we start to solve water, And when you try to bring up that sweeping, more happier music, so to speak, that when we start to solve water, we start to solve these other major issues like even human migration. But this is happening now, and I just thought I'd give a sense of, again, the urgency and also some of the things that I think that we can do and need to do together to change the course. We mentioned the floods, of course. This is happening more and more. More water in at the wrong time, in unprecedented amounts. I mean, we've never seen images like this. And the same thing, too, we're starting to see in our coastal areas. This was last year, but it's still true today. The fact that salt water is being measured further and further up our rivers. Entire New Orleans, its entire water supply is threatened by rising sea level. So where will they get their water? I mean, this isn't tomorrow. This isn't 2050. This is happening right now. So from a storytelling perspective and coming from the journalism world, this is some of the kind of images and people that have really captured my mind and stick with me. Is we see the numbers that we say that half the world's population will live in water stressed regions by 2025. Well, that's tomorrow. This is in Sao Paulo, and these are the favelas, and these little alleyways are named after the villages where people have left in whether the rainforest or agricultural areas because of drought, and they're moving to the cities. It's absolutely stunning. When I spent time with these families, they don't want to be there. They're on the move though, and this is part of the population move. This is a Somalian shepherd in Saudi Arabia. Herding sheep in Saudi Arabia because it was too dry. He had to leave. And then also we've heard the term day zero. Now, day zero is a great media term. It's very catchy. Rather than saying a complicated city faces water stress, we make stories really complicated so the public can't understand them. But when we're able to say kind of day zero, that's an impetus. This is outside of Jakarta, installing water pipelines to new developments. Of course, there's a whole other story behind that. And we also talk about groundwater, and we talk about waste and sanitation. We're talking about infrastructure. Much of the infrastructure is informal. This young girl was with women in the back who were waiting for this well to turn on in one of the poor areas in Delhi. That water only runs a couple hours a day, and there are thousands of undocumented wells, which of course are affecting the groundwater. And then what happens when the groundwater's gone? This is outside of Bangalore, where they're washing the beets. Now, you have to remember, when we're talking water, we're talking about a nexus of water, food, energy, climate, health, and equity. Well, why is he washing beets in groundwater that's pumped deeper? Because his wells have gone dry. It's because his wells have gone dry because he's irrigating with raw sewage. So there is another way of telling this water story. When the infrastructure fails, whether it's local, informal, or large scale, people find a way, but that way may be pretty unsavory. They don't eat their own produce. They send it to Delhi, this farmer said. I actually presented this at an event on water and food security. It was a breakfast session in Delhi. So it certainly awakened people wondering where their food comes from, because water is that food story. And also upstream, this was outside of Delhi, so where people were praying that the wastewater would continue to flow from places like this paper mill so they could irrigate their rice. So cadmium, heavy metals. So when water goes away, we're affecting our food supplies and obviously our capabilities to generate energy. And just a few more. Groundwater in the American heartland. We hear of the Ogallala Aquifer, the giant aquifers, and these fossil aquifers that are, yes, they're used for infrastructure for Kansas City's water supply and others down in the central U.S. That aquifer is declining, but it's also a grand challenge with legacy pollution. So when we're talking about aquifers and groundwater or surface water, then we're looking at contamination. And in Nebraska, we found just heartbreaking stories. Small towns where they can't afford to treat their water, and children are dying of cancer. These are 3 families whose children have died in a little town, 2,000 people in the central Nebraska. And we're finding more and more stories like this, where the water supplies are contaminated and directly affecting the health of our children. It was really, really heartbreaking. And of course, groundwater, we're talking about PFAS and long chain chemicals, these quote forever chemicals that are affecting our water supplies. And this is in my home state of Michigan, a former Air Force base. And how in the world do we treat this? And then how is this going to affect our infrastructure resilience and our trust of our systems? So I asked the big question, we have the solutions, and so why are we failing? Well, this is a grand story, and we talk about building awareness, but I think it's more than that. We need to understand what's holding us back and scaling. And somebody told me at the climate summit last year, said, "You water people, it's a disorganizational emergency." And I thought, well, I didn't take that personally, but there's so many great things happening, but there's still a lack of trust. And now we're seeing a stronger lack of trust in even our infrastructure and our water supplies because of potential contamination. We've seen failures. So how do we build that trust? Poor coordination. The sector is terribly fragmented between wastewater and sanitation, infrastructure, and even nature-based solutions. And there are still data and finance gaps. And then the narratives, my favorite place, is still horribly disconnected. So just wrapping up here, saving our planet is a communications challenge. It's not just hoping we're going to reach people and raise awareness. What do we want people to do? And what is the story that's going to motivate them? I say the left brain and the right brain. How do we motivate that spreadsheet side? But then how do we get them to lead with the heart? And also understand that our assumptions may be off. The assumptions of big data that may not be available. This was the Punjab Department of Irrigation's data center. Also, bringing people into the story, transparency. This is in Hyderabad. That river foams every day. He takes pictures of it, but he couldn't find out who to send the pictures to. Nobody was interested. Trust, I mentioned that before in my home state of Michigan, Flint, Michigan. I visited this young father. He's worried about his daughter's future. She may be permanently affected because of lead contamination. Imagine that. And then accountability and the social license to operate, affecting mining and mills. This is in Peru, where indigenous farmers are protesting giant gold mines that had contaminated their groundwater. And then aligning our values. How do we actually connect institutions, from our religious institutions all the way to our banking and finance institutions? Aligning those values, again, that kind of left brain, right brain. And coming back to this again, every SDG is affected. The costs of inactions are great. We face this disorganizational emergency. The three things I think we need to do is situational awareness, who's doing what where, context and ground truthing rapidly, so we're not waiting to tell the story. We are prepared to tell those stories, and we're proactive. And then that engagement, and it's not just one-off engagements. This is very, very persistent. We need a shared compass and a map. We need to be connected and inclusive. We need to be bold. We need to pull the big levers and seize the moments. And we also need to pause and take a moment like this, a profound moment in Punjab, where this farmer took me by the arm and he said, "Come, I want to show you my wealth." And it all comes back to, again, Saint-Exupéry, one of my favorite authors. And I just love this quote: "What makes the desert beautiful is that somewhere it hides a well." And so what I would encourage us as we move forward is, we have so many of the solutions. Part of it true, and Cecilia, you hit the nail on the head. Yes, we're negative. This is what's wrong. We have to make that hope visible. And then we have to provide that compass and a map so we can at least march in the same direction. So there you go, a little bit more than a media perspective, but a bigger, much more holistic kind of awareness and communications, and in a sense, a pathway forward perspective.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all these many ideas, many thoughts, many lessons learned. And you're very right. The world is moving in the international community and the academic community. The world moves very fast into paradigms that are baseless. We go from one to the other, and we still have not been able to provide clean water and sanitation. And we talk about these nexuses that have become a bandwagon between the water and the energy and the food, not because they don't exist, but because we are not able to coordinate within the energy sector, within the water sector, and within the agricultural sector, the activities. So how do we link those sectors together? And of course, they are important, but the way it's presented is like if it had been done or it hasn't been done. So all these points you have raised are important. They're reminders of reality as the previous presentations. And I wanted to, of all the topics you mentioned, let me pick up only one and come back to it. Given the situation, should media start a policy discussion and a public discussion on planned migration? It's true there is migration. And we know because of international statistics that millions of people are in floodplains. But it was known when the cities were established there and they have grown, and because things have no natural hazards have occurred, then we have forgotten. Should we start a planned migration movement globally? And how to give that message so there is not this sense of desperation of people, where am I going to go? Like the Armageddon, right? What is going to happen in the future? But more that it is planned because it needs to happen. It needs to happen. So as everything planning things bring better outcomes compared to if there are reactions. So thank you very much again. And with this planning and instead of reactions, let me come back to JUICE. That was the part of the JUICE explained, this planning in Singapore. And this planning is what has made the city-state to be more using the current vocabulary, more resilient, less vulnerable. And so how does with my previous question, thinking on the future, how do we plan? What elements do we consider?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And I'm after the very nice overview of Carl, he basically sets all the problems and the issues. It's difficult to give a good answer to this because you see, there's so many dimensions. The problems are so wide. But I'm an economist, so as Carl also just mentioned, it's very nice. I'm from the spreadsheet side, so maybe I focus my answer on that part. I mean, lots of cities, I think, are trying to solve today's problems, and they don't have resources or money to look at extreme events. And if you look at purely from economic perspective, rational economic optimization, if you look at the impact of disasters, it's always probability times consequences. And when the probability is very small and you multiply it, even if the consequences are very large, on average, it might not be a very big impact. If you have an event that can happen once in 100 years or once in 1,000 years, statistically, and the impact is large, if it happens 500 years from now, why would we spend money on that at this point in time? So purely from the rational economic perspective, very often it doesn't make sense to invest in protection against very extreme events. Of course, climate change is changing things. It's changing the statistics. It's increasing the uncertainty. And it may become more relevant. But then, of course, you hit the problem that budgets, even if it's economically rational to invest in protection against extreme events, you need to have the money to do that. And Singapore has become a very rich and wealthy country over the past decades and is able to afford very expensive solutions such as desalination and water recycling. Most countries here in the region are not at that point and are not able to afford those things. They are still trying to solve their today's problems and they don't look at tomorrow. So that is very challenging. And of course, there is a role for the international financial institutions and the international organizations. But the budgets are lacking, efforts are lacking, and it's difficult to address that dimension.
Thank you very much, Jus. If we can go now to Deborah, also with the previous question.
Right. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Cecilia, and also thank you, Carl, for the wonderful or rather depressing photos, but very thought-provoking, and also picking up on some points that I raised. Some of those pictures actually reminded me of the time way back when I started CWR in China, cancer villages, also photographs of rivers with foam, that are red, blue, purple, name your color. And it seemed like an insurmountable challenge back then. But I think, through various policies, inclusion of the public, gaining trust is also very important. China's actually managed to clean up most of its rivers and is now doing a lot better. We will be publishing a report on this together with IPE. So if you're interested in sort of seeing how China's implemented various policies, and I understand that not all of that might be able to be copy and pasted, but a lot of them are also digital solutions, and some don't really require a lot of investments. So I think that will be interesting. I just wanted to sort of like raise that it's not all dire. There is hope. It is possible to solve this, but holistically, through holistic action. If we're talking about where would you invest, so it's not that unmanageable. We are very bad at doing things if we can't see the risks ahead. So the first thing I would sort of say is that we must be able to see the risks. If we can see the risks, we can start resolving them. And so the first thing I would invest in is actually stress testing. Stress testing to the worst case scenarios. And I think a lot of the things that are unattended right now is that we're simply not ready. Our water infrastructure and a lot of our other infrastructure is just built for tomorrow, for yesterday's climate, and we're now facing tomorrow's climate is here today. And so we need to sort of stress test, and these stress tests needs to be holistic. And banks are already starting this. So in Hong Kong, 27 banks did a stress test some time ago against typhoon and coastal floods. And I think the number off the top of my head is 27% of the property loan books would be at risk if sea level rise was 0.5 meters, right? And clearly sea level rise is more likely 1 meter, or if not 2 meters to 3 meters if the ice continues to melt as fast as it is today. So I think that stress testing at the right levels, at the right timeframes, multiple risks at the same time, because often we say water risk, but it's a flood risk, it's a drought risk, it's a sea level rise risk, it's a coastal flooding risk, it's a riverine flood risk, it's a fire risk, it's a groundwater risk. So these are all different types of risks, and they all need to be tackled differently, but we need to see the holistic picture. So that's number one. And the good news is that also financial disclosures are also catching up, because a lot of the big listed companies, which sometimes do use up more resources than they should and also are highly polluting, do have to now mandatory stress test for these risks going forward. I think in Hong Kong, mandatory disclosure of these risks will be it'll be mandatory by 2026. I think Singapore 2025 off the top of my head. So if we can see that, we can resolve it. The other thing is to think about managing water from mountains to the oceans. And when I mean mountains, where the rivers start, we need to start looking at glacier melt. We need to start looking at snowpack, as well as rain and shifts in rainfall, and also groundwater absorption rates and so forth. A lot of times I find, and Carl's right, we are disorganized. The ice people are not in the water conference and vice versa. I went to an ice conference, it was full of ice people and permafrost lot, and maybe some polar oceans. But the water, we went to a water conference like 2 weeks later, and there was no ice people there. And maybe even at COP, I think the water statement for this year almost didn't include snow, the mention of the word snow, despite the fact that, Azerbaijan gets a lot of its water in snow. So, working this whole entire sphere of water in there, including the cryosphere, is also really important, because then we can actually also understand the fact that the upper watershed is disappearing, and also fast melt from Antarctica and the Arctic ice sheets. Because in Asia, especially, we're like ice. That's got nothing to do with me, but it's got everything to do with our impacts. So we need to, and we need massive storytelling on that, invest in massive storytelling on that front. And I think the third thing that I would sort of say is obviously we need money, because adaptation financing is always lagging. And because it's lagging, we always tend to sort of pick the incremental adaptation works. But I think we need to sort of put aside incremental adaptation works at the moment, because that probably lead to maladaptation, because risks are evolving so quickly that we need to sort of like just take like Carl sort of said, take a step back and look at the whole entire grand picture, and then come up with something more transformative. And here I echo him, and we really need to slow down these risks. And, you know, we're water people, but we've entered the carbon space or the decarbonization space. I would invest in rethinking the water energy climate nexus, because I think there's a lot of things that the water people can do to slow down these risks, right? I believe possibly up to 10% of global emissions are sitting in with the water sector. I think 2% or something like that, or correct. I don't have all these figures, but, you know, broadly speaking, with water supply, wastewater treatment, and also greenhouse gas release from untreated wastewater, that could all end up with about, I think, 10% of global emissions. And so just by tackling those emissions, the water sector can make a big difference, right? Just to give you perspective, cement, I think, you know, everyone always blames cement, you know, that's like a very carbon intensive industry, but I think that's only 8% of global emissions. Shipping is 4% of global emissions, right? So the water sector can actually do a lot of heavy lifting as well. And in transforming and adapting utilities and adapting wastewater treatment plants and supply, we could also upgrade and be net zero at the same time. So I think, you know, there are many things that we can do. And unfortunately, we need to invest in all of them at the same time. But those would probably be my three things that I would sort of start looking at first. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Deborah. You are very right. This starts with communication, because this will bring us to collaboration, to planning, to management, to who does what. And it's true what you mentioned. In the COPs, there is no mention on water. And we know that the impacts of climate change are those that happen in water and high in temperatures. And even then, there is all the focus is in one aspect, not because it's not important, but leaving others behind. They are stopping us from finding more solutions. So thank you very much. Let me go back to Theodore now. And Theodore, let's see two questions. The one I had asked you, and then the one that came from the public. So this, the planning, the short, mid, long terms, and this including the green solutions, not only the gray solutions, because now we need all type of solutions. Please.
Yeah, the bad news is that there is no short-term solutions. It's just emergency measures, like you see, that trying to save people from drought. And for water supply, you should put in place emergency solution, like providing water. And the other bad news is that the society has a short memory. I just recall it from my own experience that when I started my job in the company 30 years ago, there was a drought, a short supply of water, and then it was a momentum that we used, and we put the water value on the spot, on the highlight. So then we start doing the proper investment. But these are the gray measures, trying to do a new infrastructure, having new water sources, new pipes, and so on. But on the other hand, we should put value on the things, and thinking upfront, not at the end, trying to say, okay, the water is important, so we increase a bit the price with the amounts needed for the investments. And when we are looking for new water sources, for instance, we have to look on the non-revenue water and reducing the water loss, which is more than 50% all over the world, are huge water which is lost. Now it's since decades saving water campaigns, and for the first time in Romania we have a new project for water reuse. These are the mid and long-term solution that we should have in mind. When I'm talking about the green solutions are very suitable for flooding prevention. Like you know, all the people wanted to be connected with the roof water to the sewage system, which is not a sustainable solution. Now we are trying to ask for people to do infiltration or to do rainwater retention systems to use that water later, or to release that water later after the heavy rain. So we've seen when in the World Water Congress in Copenhagen, some solution for controlling flooding of the parks. They have parks which could be controlled flooded in order to avoid the flooding of the city. There are some standards requiring for the new buildings, new planners, new city planners to think green, not to do only the pipe and concrete work. For instance, there is another green solution for protecting the aquifers from pollution or over abstractions. I could give you an example. Vienna is buying all the forestry around the sources, if the water sources. If there is a property unsold, the city is buying first the thing. So we need to look at the new problems with innovative solutions and not using the classic ones.
Thank you very much. Let me repeat. You mentioned many important aspects, but one of them is to see the new problems with different eyes, to see them with innovative eyes, not the same. So if we have to stop and look again to find those solutions, that's what needs to be done. Thank you very much. I will now go to Carl, and I will ask all of you, I will come back to all of you so that you can please give us your last comments in approximately 1 minute so that we can finish. But Carl, so in addition to my question of planned migration, how to communicate it, let me also add one question that came from the floor that is in terms of education. And I like this question very much. What do we need to be teaching people to build better cities and better futures? So if you could please answer or comment on both these topics.
Yes, no, absolutely. So what do we need to be teaching people? I think we do need to teach people that there is a way forward. Deb, thanks for pointing that out. On the media side, we do tend to dwell on what's happening now, and I hope that I touched on that compass and a map. So that what we need to teach people is how to think and how to seek solutions and how to ask questions, not only in their communities, but what's the system's lever? How do you hold to account, whether it's community leaders or all the way up to national leaders, that water is important? Because getting the right policies in place, that drives investment. It also creates incentives for the financing and for the engineering and the other the levels of kind of innovation that we need to put in motion. Because the good news is we know most of the solutions. We have them within our hands today, and if not, they're just around the corner. So the education piece is really, yes, we have a problem, and yes, we do have a path forward, and yes, this is you in that picture. We have to create communities, not just push messages on people, because we talk about migration, and that's a tough one. Because look at the U.S. border, look at Syria, look at a lot of the world's conflicts have been triggered. We can trace back, whether it's the main trigger or water played a role, drought, floods, in migration and conflict. So how are we going to look at this? Is a really charged topic, and I'd point you to a book by Parag Khanna called "Move," and about how our populations are moving and will be moving because of climate and because of water. And so that's a complicated story, and it's one I think we need to look at from a world of, this isn't a body of people that's a threat. These are individual lives, and these are people that are moving because they don't have a path forward for the most part. They're being pushed by climate, and it's usually by a water cause. But one other little point here too is we always have to say, who is the media? Today, the media doesn't have the deep resources they used to tackle these complicated issues. So we have to, in the water world, who is it that we want to reach, and what do we want them to do? And coming back to Deborah's point too, the ice people aren't hanging out with the water people, even the ice people are water people. And so how do we make sure that water is part of, if it's not included just clearly up front in these conferences, making sure that water is part of each one of the SDGs, is part of each one of the conversations in agriculture and energy, so that water needs to show up there. We can't wait for them. Energy to come to us. And so I think those are a couple of the key points. I come back to that compass in the map, because it's like a flotilla. There's so many great things happening, but there's ships oftentimes sailing in different directions. So if we can get a through line, then we can truly start to solve these. And that is left brain and right brain. It's the spreadsheet to justify, it's the story to drive the heart.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all these messages. Is the you. I like very much the you. You are in the picture, which means that everybody has a say on it, and everybody has a responsibility, but also everybody is part of the solution. And I would like to come to all of you to close the session. Again, thanking all of you to be here. And so if we could please start with Deborah, with your final thoughts, please.
I think, water is a cross-cutting problem, right? And it definitely needs all our help now. And I would just like to sort of say, I'm not really a water person, right? I'm an ex-banker who wandered into the water space. So it doesn't really matter what you are, and whether you're a water engineer, water expert, know anything about water, but as long as you want to do something in this space, you can. And we should. You should just sort of like roll up your sleeves and dive in. Sorry about the pun here. And absolutely we need, not just the water people to get together. So definitely the ice and the water people, but across all industries, because that's the only way we're going to sort of like resolve this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot has been said, and the problems are complex. I think that good decision making is a very important aspect. Long-term decision making, rational decision making. There's also lots of tools, decision making methods have been developed. I think Singapore is probably a good example of evidence-based decision making for water problems, and I think a lot of countries could learn from that, but also use that type of approaches to look more longer term instead of trying to react to whatever is happening now. And that is probably the only way how you can address these very complex problems.
Thank you, Jus. Theodore, please.
Be aware, be ready. I'll come back to the question about teaching. We have 100,000 people in our city in school, and we managed to bring 5,000 of them this year to our water treatment plant and wastewater treatment plant. I think we should start with that. We have in the university where we're taught to build pipes and dams. We need to change that. That's why I encourage my fellows Romanian to watch this kind of solution. So nobody, it's safe. So be proactive rather than reactive. As Jost said, communicate like Carl said, and join the International Water Association for organized and disorganized sector, as Carl said.
And let's finish with Carl, please.
Okay. Our disorganizational emergency. I think that we can really make huge leaps forward with the leadership, and also when people realize their own, I'll even say, superpowers. So Singapore taking a leadership role not only in within country, but in things like co-chairing the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. Sharing and driving those superpowers so that not just looking inward, what can we do, what are we doing, but communicating and motivating and inviting others to be a part, and then underscoring that urgency. Again, this is not a tomorrow challenge. As I think I demonstrated, I was there, I was behind the camera, I made personal relationships with everyone in those photos. This is happening now, and these are real people, and this is a urgency that can't be pushed off till tomorrow.
And this is very true, what you all have said, and I appreciate very much all your thoughts. For many years, we saw problems in developing countries rather than developed countries. And it may be because many developed countries are in temperate zones. But there was also this assumed understanding that there were better preparedness, and there is. There are more robust institutions, the legislation is better, and its application than in the developing countries in general. But even then, in developed country cities or developed country areas, we have now very senior problems. So do we have to improve our preparedness? Do we have to consider these future problems that are already happening? How do we see these problems with the eyes of possibilities? How do we value not only the resource, but all the positiveness that comes with valuing the result? How do we coordinate better? How to finalize, to communicate in a more effective way? Again, let me thank all of you for being here, both you as panel members, and for the people who are following us, and looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you again.
Thank you.